everybody's eyes are on the Senate this year, everybody's eyes are on the House, and almost no one is talking about the fact that 36 states, more than 2/3 of the entire country, are electing a governor this November, and one of the largest gubernatorial cycles in American history. 6 of the 7 presidential battleground states are on this list. Whoever wins these races controls redistricting fights, election administration, and state-level policy on everything from abortion to guns for the next 4 years, regardless of what happens in Washington. This is the map that decides who actually runs your daily life, and I do not think enough people are paying attention to it. Let's fix that right now, state by state, and stick around for the next 2 calls, because they are the ones that could genuinely reshape both parties heading into 2028. The baseline here is almost a perfect coin flip. 26 Republican governors, 24 Democratic governors, heading into a cycle where 15 incumbents cannot run again because of term limits. Democrats already flipped their first governorship of this cycle last year in Virginia, and that win is looming over every single one of the races I'm about to walk you through, because it proved that the Democratic coalition that showed up in an off-year election is still there and still motivated. Start with Florida, because this is the biggest rise on the entire board. The incumbent Republican governor is term limited out, leaving the most coveted governorship held by either party completely open for the first time in 8 years. Multiple Republicans are joking for the nomination, and on the Democratic side, a former Republican congressman who left the party specifically to challenge the current administration has entered the race. Republicans hold a serious structural advantage in Florida after the state's dramatic rightward shift over the last 2 presidential cycles. My call: Florida stays red. Democrats will spend real money here because it is Florida and the price is enormous, but the underlying partisan lean of the state is simply too steep to overcome in one cycle, even a good one nationally. Arizona is where things get real interesting. Democrats incumbent Katie Hobbs is seeking re-election in a state that voted for Biden in 2020 and Trump in 2024, the definition of a genuine swing state. On the Republican side, a sitting member of the Congress currently holds a commanding primary lead. Early general election polling has consistently shown Hobbs ahead, with one survey putting her up by double digits and a more recent one showing a tighter 4-point edge. Prediction markets currently have her favored at somewhere around 3/4. This is a real demographic story underneath this race too. Hispanic voters who swung hard towards Trump in 2024 appear to be soaring on this job performance according to a recent national polling. And if their reversal shows up at the ballot box in Arizona specifically, it disproportionately might call. Hobbs holds Arizona, but this tightens as we get closer to November, the way every close statewide race in this state always does. Iowa might be the single most surprising storyline on this entire map. This is a state that has voted solidly red at every level for over a decade, and yet the open governor's race to replace a retiring Republican incumbent has turned into a genuine toss-up. The Democratic forerunner, the sitting state auditor, has built a reputation for winning over independents and even some Republicans, and the state's economy has taken a real hit from tariff policy, with growth actually contracting at points over the last year. Recent polling has shown him with a narrow lead, and prediction markets have moved sharply in his direction over the past several months. From Republicans being heavily favored to flip the seat just a few years ago to now trailing in most models. My call: this is the closest race on the entire board, and I think the Democrats win it. Narrowly on the strength of an economic message that this landing is exactly the kind of state that usually tunes that message out. Kansas sits at the opposite end of the spectrum. The term-limited Democratic governor built a career on outperforming her party's baseline in a state where registration Republicans outnumbered Democrats by nearly 2-1. Without her on the ballot, more forecasters, including several rating outlets that track these races professionally, have shifted this race to lean Republican, making it the single most likely seat to flip parties anywhere in the country this cycle. My poll: Kansas flips red. This was always going to be the hardest seat for Democrats to defend once the one candidate who had a personal knack for winning it stepped aside. Georgia's governorship is the only Republican-held seat rated as a genuine toss-up almost across the board. Democrats are backing a prominent big city mayor with real name recognition but real politics baggage tied to her handling of a crime and pandemic-era policy in her city. Republicans have nominated a wealthy businessman looking to capitalize on those vulnerabilities. Early polling shows the Democrat with a sizzling lead. though a meaningful chunk of that polling comes from Democratic-aligned pollsters, which is a detail worth keeping in mind before anyone declares this one decided. My call: this race tightens considerably by the fall, and I lean towards Republicans closing the gap enough to hold a seat, though I hold this prediction loosely given how much shift in a state this dynamic. Nevada might be the closest statewide race in the entire country that almost no one outside political circles is watching. The Republican incumbent won his first term by barely 15,000 votes after 8 years of Democratic control, and this rematch is shaping up to be equally razor-thin. My call: incumbency and genuinely competitive economic message keep this one in Republican hands, but I would not be surprised in either direction. And if you want a single bellwether race to watch on election night for how the entire cycle is breaking, this is the one I would pick. Wisconsin rounds out my closest watch list. The two-term Democratic incumbent had won both of his elections by narrow margins in a state that also elected Republican senators and swing hard in presidential races. And this time, he does not have a marquee Senate race on the same ballot to help drive up turnout. The state's dairy and manufacturing economy has become a genuine flashpoint in the tariff debate, and Democratic strategists are betting heavily on affordability as their core message. My call: the incumbents hold on narrowly in what will likely be one of the last races called on election night. Before I get to my final board, I want to widen this out because the 7 races I already walked you through are not the whole story, not even close. There is a structural imbalance sitting underneath this entire cycle that no one has mentioned yet, and it matters enormously. Democrats are defending the 5 governorships in the state that Donald Trump actually won in 2024: Arizona, Kansas, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Republicans, by comparison, are only defending 2 governorships in states that Kamala Harris won: New Hampshire and Vermont. That is genuinely a lopsided amount of exposure sitting on the Democratic side of this ledger, and it is exactly why so many of the closest races on this board involve an incumbent or open Democratic seat rather than a Republican one. Zoom out to the full picture, and most independent trackers now count somewhere between 10 and 13 of these 36 races as genuinely competitive, with 4 of them, Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, and Michigan, sitting in true toss-up territory and attracting the overwhelming majority of outside spending and candidate attention. Georgia, Ohio, Florida, Colorado, Maine, Kansas, Connecticut, and New Mexico round out the next tier down. Races that lean towards one party but not locked in. If Democrats manage to sweep all of these toss-up states in what is shaping up to be the more favorable national environment for them, that alone represents one of the most significant shifts in the state-level power in a decade, heading directly into the next round of congressional redistricting. Now let's go to the Michigan properly, because I undersold that one earlier and it deserves a full treatment. Governor Gretchen Whitmer is term limited out after 2 years, leaving her seat completely open in a state Trump carried narrowly in 2024. Secretary of the State Jocelyn Benson is the clear Democratic frontrunner, carrying endorsements for a long list of labor unions and National Democratic Group, along with a notable recent endorsement from former Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. On the Republican side, sitting Congressman John James has emerged as the frontrunner of the nomination. There was a genuine wildcard here for months, with former Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan flirting with an independent bid that could have scrambled the entire race. And he withdrew from the contention back in May, simplifying what was shaping up to be a genuinely unpredictable 3-way fight. My call on Michigan is that this stays one of the 4 true toss-ups on the board, and I lean very slightly towards Benson holding it for Democrats. On the strength of her statewide name recognition built over 8 years as the state's chief election official and a fundraising and endorsement operation that already looks like a general election campaign rather than a primary one. And I want to be honest about the slightly is doing the real work in that sentence. This is a genuine coin flip in a genuine battleground state, and either party walking away with it in November would not surprise me even a little bit. Now, I need to correct something I said earlier in this video, because the situation in Wisconsin has actually changed since I first drafted this. I described the incumbent Democrat governor as running for 3rd term. That is no longer accurate. Governor Tony Evers announced he will not seek a 3rd term, opening up what was already a competitive state into a fully open race with no incumbent on either side. That is exactly the kind of thing I warned you about at the start of this series. This map does not sit still, and I would rather correct myself in real time than leave you with information that is already out of date. With Evers out, Wisconsin's Democratic primary has become genuinely crowded, featuring the sitting lieutenant governor, a former lieutenant governor who ran statewide before, the Milwaukee County Executive, and 2 sitting state legislators, all competing for the nomination in a primary that will not be settled until August. On the Republican side, the sitting member of the Congress has emerged as the clear frontrunner, Mike Hall. Without the benefit of incumbency, this race gets harder for Democrats to hold than it would have been with others on the ballot. And I now rate this as a genuine toss-up leaning only barely blue, a meaningfully bigger risk for Democrats rather than early read on this state suggested. New York is not competitive in the way Michigan and Wisconsin are, but the storyline underneath it is worth knowing anyway. Governor Kathy Hochul, the state's first woman governor, is running for a second full term, and her most likely Republican opponent is a local elected official from Long Island, after a sitting member of the Congress who was widely expected to be the frontrunner dropped out of contention entirely. Mike Hall, Hochul holds New York comfortably. The state's partisan lean is simply too steep for a competitive Republican challenger in a year like this one, regardless of who ends as the actual nominee. Minnesota deserves attention for one specific reason. A sitting United States Senator jumped up into this race after the incumbent governor decided not to seek a third term, and that is not something that happens often. Watching a senator voluntarily give up a Senate race to run for a governor tells you something about how that person is reading their own state's political map, and possibly about longer-term ambitions beyond just running a state governor. On the Republican side, the state's House Speaker is among a crowded field vying for the nomination. Mike Hall, Minnesota stays blue. This remains a state where Democrats hold a real structural advantage at the statewide level, and a well-known senator jumping into an open race only reinforces that. New Mexico has one of the more genuinely historical storylines in this entire board. The term-limited Democratic governor, herself the first Latina ever elected to the office, is being succeeded in a primary that included a former United States Secretary of the Interior who would become the first Native American ever elected governor of any state if she wins in November. She faces a Republican mayor from a mid-sized city in the general election. Mike Hall, New Mexico stays blue comfortably. And if the Democrats' primary winner goes up to win in November, that specific outcome would be genuinely historic, worth remembering regardless of which party you support. Now, I mentioned Maine's chaotic Senate races earlier in this series, but the governor's race happening in this very same state deserves its own separate call, because it is a completely different contest with a completely different dynamic. The term-limited Democratic governor is being succeeded by the former state House Speaker, who emerged from a genuinely crowded primary field that included a sitting Secretary of the state and multiple other well-known Maine Democrats. She faces a former Region-era State Department official on the Republican side, Mike Hall. Maine's governorship stays blue, even if the Senate race in the same state remains one of the most volatile contests in the country. Voters splitting their ticket between a Senate race and a governor's race in the same state on the same ballot happens more often than people assume. And I would not be shocked if Maine does exactly that this November. New Hampshire is a genuinely structural oddity this cycle because it is one of the only states where Republicans, not Democrats, are defending a seat in the territory the other party carried at the presidential level. The incumbent Republican governor, who won her current term with a solid majority, is seeking re-election against a Democratic challenger who also ran for the same seat once before. There's also a wildcard third-party candidate in the mix, an independent-turned Democratic primary entrant who ultimately opted to run under a brand new political party rather than stay in either major party lane, which could complicate the vote math in a state that elects its governor every 2 years rather than every 4. Mike Hall, the incumbent Republican, holds New Hampshire on the strength of solid approval rating and the practical advantage every sitting governor has in a 2-year re-election cycle where voters rarely have time to sour on someone before the next election rolls around. Colorado, Connecticut, and Oregon round out the group of states where Democrats are favored but not unopposed. And I want to group these together because the story in each is similar, even though the specifics differ. All 3 currently hold Democratic governors or are open seats leaning Democratic. All 3 are getting real Republican investments because no race this cycle is being taken for granted, and all 3 would represent a genuine surprise if they flipped. Mike Hall across 3 states, Democrats hold each one of them, though I would keep half an eye open on Colorado specifically, where a handful of forecasters have it rated as merely leaning rather than safely blue. Now here's the part of this entire conversation that I think deserves the most attention and gets the least of it. The governors elected this November will still be sitting in office when the next full round of congressional redistricting happens after the 2030 census. That means winning a governorship in a state like Wisconsin or Michigan this year is not just about the next 4 years of state policy. It is about who controls the pen the next time this entire country redraws its congressional maps from scratch. If you have been following my house prediction videos and the redistricting arms race I described between Texas and California, understand that this governor race is the undercard fight for the exact same war, just one census cycle further down the road. I also want to flag the sheer scale of outside spending already pouring into this cycle, because it tells you what races the professional forecasters class actually believes are winnable, regardless of what the public polling suggests. The 4 true toss-up states, Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, and Michigan, are absorbing the overwhelming majority of outside group spending across the entire 50-state governor map combined. When that much money concentrates into the few states, it is usually a signal that both parties' internal data agrees on where the real fight actually is, even when their public rhetoric claims a dozen other states are also in play. There is also a meaningful representation story running through this entire cycle that is worth naming on its own. Women currently serve as governor in several of the states holding election this cycle, including both Arizona and New York. And multiple open seat races across the map feature multiple women candidates competing for their party's nomination. Whatever the outcome in November, this cycle is on track to feature one of the most diverse states of the major party gubernatorial nominees in recent memory, across both parties. Abortion has not become the singular defining issue of this cycle the way it was in the first midterm after the fall of Roe. But it has not disappeared either. It remains a live and active issue in several of these campaigns, particularly in states where a governor's veto pen is the last remaining check on a state's legislature controlled by an opposite party. In a handful of these races, it is one factor among several rather than the entire campaign, but candidates on both sides are still being asked about it directly, and their answers are still moving real numbers of persuadable voters in swing states within these states. Now, I want to return to the structural imbalance I raised earlier because I think it deserves one more pass before we move on to the final board. 5 Democratic-held seats sitting in Trump territory is a genuinely uncomfortable amount of exposure heading into any midterm, let alone one where the sitting president's approval rating is as weak as I described in my house prediction video. The fact that Democrats are still favored to hold 3 or 4 of the 5 seats despite the exposure tells you something real about how much residual strength the party's gubernatorial brand still carries at the state level, separate and apart from how people feel about the national politics. On the flip side, Republicans defending only 2 seats in Harris's territory tells you that the Republicans build a genuinely small and well-insulated gubernatorial map for themselves this cycle, mostly by virtue of when these particular seats happen to come up on a 4-year or 2-year cycle rather than through any specific strategic foresight. Sometimes the map is just the map, and this year it happens to hand Republicans a structurally easier defensive assignment rather than Democrats have, even in a national environment that otherwise favors Democrats almost everywhere else on the ballot. Now, I want to be honest about how many of these calls could still move before November, because governor races often get decided by genuinely local factors that never show up in a national polling average. A late-breaking scandal in a single state legislature, a national disaster response that goes well or badly, a single well-funded local ad campaign in the closing week, any of these things can flip an individual governor's race in ways that have nothing to do with the national environment at all. That is precisely why these races are historically harder to forecast accurately than Senate or presidential races, and why I am holding several of my calls in this specific video more loosely than I held my polls in the Senate or House videos in this series. I also want to note that primary season itself is still actively unfolding in several of these states as I'm recording this, with a wave of primary dates stacked through July and August in states like Arizona, Michigan, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. Whoever wins these primaries is going to reshape the general election calculus almost immediately and sometimes within days, because primary electorates and general electorates are frequently pulled in different directions on exactly how moderate or how progressive a party's eventual nominee should be. Put bluntly, this cycle is going to reward whichever party does the better job in nominating candidates who can actually win a general election in a swing state, rather than candidates who simply win over the most energized slice of their own primary electorate. That tension is playing out visibly in Wisconsin's crowded Democratic field, in Michigan's now simplified two-way race, and in more than one Republican primary where a Trump-aligned hardliner is squaring off against a more institutionally aligned alternative. I keep coming back to one idea through the entire series, and I think it applies here more than anywhere else. National narratives about a red wave or a blue wave almost always overstate how uniform these outcomes actually turn out to be. This governor's map is the clearest proof that the principle on the entire ballot this cycle. Democrats are likely to lose a seat in Kansas, likely to gain one in Iowa, and are sitting on a genuine point flip in at least 3 or 4 other states simultaneously. That is not a wave in either direction. That is exactly the kind of mixed, locally driven outcome that state-level elections in this country actually tend to produce, wave years included. Let me also say plainly why I think this particular map deserves more national media attention than it currently does. Every single one of these 36 winners will still be in office long after this specific midterm cycle is forgotten by most casual news consumers. They will be the ones directing the state's response the next time a natural disaster, a public health emergency, or an economic downturn hits. The Senate and the House majorities get rebuilt every 2 years. A governor elected this November is shaping a state for the better part of a decade. So here's where I actually land, factoring in everything I just walked through beyond my original 7 states. I think Kansas is the single most likely state to flip anywhere on the board. I still think Iowa is the most surprising flip in the other direction, but I now consider Wisconsin a genuine coin flip rather than a modest Democratic hold, given Evers stepping aside, and I consider Michigan an equally close call given how simplified that race becomes once Duggan's independent bid collapses. Everything else I've covered is in this expanded rundown: Minnesota, New Mexico, Maine's governorship, New York, Colorado, Connecticut, Oregon, and New Hampshire. I expect to hold for whatever party currently occupies each seat. Add it all up, and here's my updated final board. Kansas flips blue to red, still the single seat I'm most confident actually changes hands. Iowa flips from red to blue, still the strangest storylines of this entire cycle. Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, and Michigan are all genuine toss-ups that could break in either direction and will absorb the most money and attention all the way to election night. Minnesota, New Mexico, Maine, New York, Colorado, Connecticut, Oregon, and New Hampshire all hold for this current party. Georgia remains the one true jumble beyond the 4 headline toss-ups that I genuinely cannot call with confidence. Here's why all of this matters beyond just bragging rights. Whoever sits in these governors' mansions in January controls the next round of congressional redistricting fights in several of these states, appoints election officials, and sets the tone for how 2028 presidential race gets fought on the ground in exactly the swing states that will decide it. That is not a consolation prize election. In a lot of ways, it is the more important one. Now tell me which governor's race you think is the real sleep of the cycle, because I guarantee there is one on the ballot in your own state that deserves more attention than it actually gets nationally. If this helped you make sense of a map most national coverage barely touches, share it with someone who only follows the presidential race, because by the time 2028 rolls around, the people sitting in these 36 offices right now will already be shaping how that fight gets fought. And I will be tracking every one of these as the primaries finish rolling in.